Dick, let's talk about your experience with Hamilton Fish, please.
Well, Congressman Fish, as you remember, was a Republican member from New York and came from about as patrician a Republican line as you could imagine. There's been a direct descent from George Washington's staff. There's been a member of every generation of his family has served in government since the Revolution. And he is as much of a blue stocking, he's died, which I'm sorry to say, but he a blue stocking Republican, as you could imagine. He was just a tall, elegant man. But he was open-minded. He really was concerned about this. He didn't approve of what he was seeing and what he was hearing in the evidence. And he asked John Doar if he could send a couple of us out to his home on a Sunday to visit with him, to go over his concerns about the evidence, to be sure he was right in his understanding of where things led and so forth. Because every member of the Judiciary Committee was a lawyer, all 38 of them. And so he, as a lawyer, was trying to analyze through, and as a Republican, he was certainly a lawyer, but he was also a very, very principled man. So Judge Sack and I were sent out to his home in northwest Washington, and may have been across the line in Maryland. I'm not sure whether it's still in the district. But anyway, his wife had gone off somewhere for the weekend, and so he had the house, and he was using it to just try to think and study and look at stuff. And so we spent the afternoon answering his questions, and he invited us out into the garden. It was a real pleasant time. I mean, it wasn't too hot. And somehow or other, the press got a hold of the fact that some members of the staff were going to meet with one of the Republican minority. And they showed up on the street outside, and Connie Chung was the news person with a camera crew and all this. And they wanted to know why we were there. And when we had finished our meeting with him, he said, well, we might as well relax. How about a gin and tonic? And so we were sitting in the garden, and they wanted to come in. He said, well, why not? Come on. And it was at a moment in time, really a part of the thing, where there was sort of a split about the Republicans because Bert Jenner became persuaded that the president was guilty of many of these things, and almost became a co-majority counsel with John Doar. And some of the Republican members of the committee felt that they had to have an advocate, if you will, and Sam Garrison was the designated person. And so there was some speculation in the press about ill will and axe jobs and, was Garrison doing this and that, none of which had any real consequence to the more important constitutional process. But it was sensational. And so Connie Chung came in and she asked Mr. Fish if she could talk to him on camera about what was going on. And he turned to Bob Sack and me and said, look, these two guys know a whole lot more about this than I do. I'm learning from them. They've studied the evidence. You ask them. We said, oh, no. We don't get on camera. We don't make comments. We don't have anything. And so we stayed behind the camera, but she interviewed him. And he had some very important and thoughtful things to say about the constitutional process and about the sort of what had happened in the politics to get to this, and the duty of people, regardless of their political parties, to see the process out, and then they asked the raw meat questions about, well, what's going on the committee about firing Mr. Jenner, and he said, we didn't do that, and Sam Garrison's role, and so he tried to knock down all that talk. On the evening news, they have a little segment about the fact that he was interviewed, and that's all they put on. They completely ignored all the thoughtful things he had to say, all the concerns he had at a real high and proper philosophical level. And I remember went over to the hearing room the next day and ran into Connie Chung, and I asked her, I said, why did you do that? Why did you select that, which was just passing sort of gossip and trash, versus something meaningful that he had to say? She says, I don't do it. She said, the editors select. I put the whole film to them, and they choose it. I don't have editorial control. But I thought it was very sad and disappointing, that was the way it got portrayed. But I do remember Mr. Fish. He decided to vote against the president in the long run. And Delbert Latta, who was a congressman from Ohio, I believe is where he was from, had been put on the committee as sort of the advocate, if you will, for the president. And he was buttonholing Mr. Fish. And Latta was a short, sort of stocky, bulldog kind of man versus Fish, who was this patrician. And he was saying to him, you've got to understand, it's us Republicans have to stay together, and we have to do this, and you're a Republican, and so forth. Mr. Fish drew himself up to and he was about 6 feet 3 or 4, and looked down and he says, Mr. Latta, do not presume to tell me what it means to be a Republican. And his family had been Republicans since Abraham Lincoln. And so it was in one of those little chambers behind the thing, and I thought, wow, is that? And then Fish, of course, voted in favor of the articles of impeachment. I'm sorry.
You were there. You witnessed.
Yeah,
this.
I was standing in the room. We all used the same break room.
And you're also a Republican.
Yes.
That must have been a very interesting moment.
It was, and I was very proud of Mr. Fish, obviously. I thought, boy, is that, He didn't give a Weasley answer, didn't sort of say, well, I'm doing the best we can, we'll all, he just was not going to be berated about it.
Tell me, do you remember at all what his concern, the concerns that brought you and Bob Sack to see him that day?
Tim, this is awful to say, but I cannot. It was we spent probably 3.5 hours answering questions that he had about, is this established in the evidence, and is this link there, and are you satisfied from that the president really was involved? It was the kinds of things, but particulars, I'm sorry to say, I cannot.
Now, one of the things I want to get back to Dick Cates, because one of his jobs, I'm sure in the same period, was to be giving seminars to some of the members, doing the same thing.
They did meet with various members, and interestingly, some members of Congress who were not on the committee but expected to have to vote on the articles when they reached the floor were asking for input. Congressman Bill Dickinson, who was from Montgomery and knew me, asked Doar if I could be sent over to his office to talk to him about it and the path it was taking. And I have a feeling that Mr. Dickinson was concerned as to how it would play politically back home. I do know that Walter Flowers, who was a Democrat member of the committee, asked me to come to his office, and he said, look, I don't want to, he was going to make an opening statement, as they each did. He said, I want to be careful not to prejudge, but there are some clear areas of concern. And he says, and I think you, as a fellow Alabamian, will understand it's got to, people in Alabama are not interested in the Cambodian bombing. They probably favor it, probably think they ought to bomb them more. So he said, I don't want to focus on that kind of thing. And he said, do you mind drafting an outline for me? And I said, well, of course, I'm happy to. And Doar said it was all right. And so I stayed up all night writing out a statement that I expected him to use as an outline, and gave it to him at 6:30 in the morning or something. I mean, it was finished, and I certainly thought it was rough. I mean, he read it that night. All he did is introduce it. He had a paragraph in advance about who he was, I mean, where he came from and what his background, and he was trying to say this is where I come from, and he mentioned that a fellow Alabamian was on the staff, and then he started in and saying, but I want to say what my concerns are. And he went I was sitting in the room, I was flabbergasted. I said, if I thought he was going to read it, I would have written it, attempted to be as literate as possible, but he virtually adopted it. I mean, it was his decision to adopt it. I couldn't put words in his mouth, but he was satisfied with them, and his remarks were generally favorably viewed at the time. So
his statement was quite emotional too.
But
he was quite emotional when he gave.
Yeah, he was.
It was difficult for him.
It was because he was a Democrat, but he was a Southern Democrat who really was sort of a Republican in those days, and it was a hard thing for him about it. Even though politically he was on the Democrat side. Walter Flowers died way too early. I don't think he lived 10 years, 12 years past that date. I don't know what, but he had a great future. I thought he could, as a senator and things, but anyway, unfortunately.
What part of Alabama was he from?
He was from up in Tuscaloosa, northwest Alabama.
And you're from what part?
Montgomery, which is central.
You mean you were born
yeah.
there?
I think I mentioned to you when we were just chatting, among the Democrats on the committee, there were several among the Republicans on the committee, there were several like Mr. Fish who were really troubled by it. And then there was some hard right, pro-Nixon people. I wish I could remember the gentleman's name. He was an older congressman, but he was very hostile to the whole.
Sandman?
Wasn't Sandman. It'll probably come to me. But in any event,
Moorhead? Well, in any case.
I know he sat on the lower right tier. I can picture him. But he was very, very rigid about his views on it. And we kept saying in private sessions that you probably don't want to stick your neck out too far because the evidence is going to be pretty strong. And that's what Bill Dickinson wanted to do. He wanted to say, look, if it's that strong, I don't want to come out and look like a fool where I just say there's not a shred of evidence or anything. And so we tried to caution members that at least keep an open line. And I remember he, as I say, was very, but my office in the Congressional Office Building was on the second floor, so it had a little height, and there was a street between it and the Longworth Building. And he came at the end after the president had resigned. I remember him walking out, and he looked up and he saw several of us sitting in my office because there was a big plate glass window. And to his credit, he looked up and he said, "You guys were right," and gave us a thumbs up signal, And so, that was kind of an interesting, tribute to the work of the staff.
I know would have been very difficult for him.
Yeah, Daniels, I believe, was his name.
Do you remember where you were? Well, when you heard the president would be resigning.
Well, we were in the Congressional Office Building because we set up some televisions to see the speech, and don't remember how certainly it was public knowledge he was going to make a speech, and that was the speculation. But we were all clustered around television screens.
Were you surprised that he resigned rather than go through with the trial?
A little bit. Certainly he had been very combative publicly about it, that I will not, but by then it had all kind of come unglued with the tapes and with the Supreme Court's decision against him and the need to produce further tapes, and he just didn't have any base left anymore.
What was your reaction when you read the transcript of what became known as the smoking gun tape?
That's one that Dick Cates predicted what was in it, and sure enough it was. Predicted almost exactly that would have to have been there. So I don't guess I was surprised. I remember commenting to Dick that, well, look, here it is. This is your script.
He was a great trial lawyer.
He was.
What did he teach you about being a great trial lawyer?
The kind of deductive reasoning, you know, you can guess at facts that have to exist for one fact to connect to another. Now you have to prove it as part of a trial, but he was really good at that, and he was really good at guessing at what witnesses would do and would say, and trying to work with them to get them to tell the things they knew. He just was a really skilled builder of a fact pattern and the logic that underlay it. And of course, he was a great communicator. He was funny and charming, and so I can't be Dick Cates. This is not a personality, but I certainly was a man that I knew would have been a formidable person in a courtroom because of that. Juries would love him. Courts would accept because he was earnest and funny at the same time. And,
did you ever interact with Chairman Rodino at all?
a little bit. He was gracious enough to come over to our headquarters and meet us all. When we worked for him ultimately through John Doar, and but certainly not closely.
What about Francis O'Brien, his chief of staff? Did you?
Certainly met. Same sort of thing. More interaction there with Doar and Jenner than with us.
Tell us, because it's important to the story, what can you, from your own perspective, what can you tell us about how Jenner changed or came to the conclusion that the president was probably guilty?
Well, I don't know if I can describe his mental process, but Bert Jenner, of course, was a very, very experienced both trial lawyer and litigator. I mean, in the broadest sense, he was a skilled, and I use political in the. I want to be careful about the word. I don't mean politics in the who you vote for sense, but he had been head of the American Bar's Judicial Selection Committee for many years. People knew him everywhere. They trusted him. He was head of a big Chicago firm. He was well regarded. But he certainly was somebody who would qualify as the honest man. And when he listened to the evidence, when he looked at the evidence, when he met with us with Judge Byrne, he met with Henry Kissinger. He listened, he saw, and he just said, I can see what's in front of my eyes. And I can't be dishonest about it. I'm not here as an advocate to try to color the evidence or shade it or misinterpret it. And so once he became convinced of that, he said, it's my duty just as John Doar would have thought it was his duty if the evidence showed there was no involvement of the president. That Doar would have ruthlessly reported that. He wouldn't have been an advocate or a partisan. Bert, as I say, he functioned after that as almost a co-manager, if you will, of the inquiry.
Do you? I know it's a long time ago, but if you think about sort of the evolution of the inquiry, do you think that Mr. Jenner came to this conclusion early on, or were we talking about after the tapes, or after the White House released the transcripts of its transcripts, or where was it?
Well, I don't know if I could place it precisely, but I do know that when the White House released its edited version of the transcripts, that Bert thought that was dishonest. He said that's not candid, and there's a reason for that. When people aren't forthcoming and they're clearly attempting to alter the appearance of the evidence, and that's a decisive fact to most trial lawyers. You have to ask why, but I don't know exactly. Certainly, he had access to hear the tapes. I mean, he was one of those. I mean, had access to everything, and I can't tell you exactly where in there, but certainly for most of the spring after we got the tapes, he was pretty clearly aligned with the majority side in the sense that, and many of the staff who were Republicans were also. I mean, Sam Garrison was an exception, but I think Sam felt it was his obligation to be the raw meat man and to challenge everything and to say, wait, that's subject to a different interpretation. Let's, this.
Do you remember talking to some of the other Republican staffers about what they were thinking? You said that Garrison was an exception, so.
Yeah, and I do think that the staff, certainly by the time we started presenting the evidence and before the Congress, was pretty unified that everyone said, because everyone was a lawyer who said, that's what's there in the evidence. There it is. And unless you were just going to be willfully blind or partisan to the point of unreasonableness, you had to conclude that. And I think it was across the spectrum of the staff. Now, you have people. Hillary was a liberal Democrat. But John would not, he didn't hire partisans. I remember that there were some people who came in to be interviewed who clearly said, thought and expressed that they were there for the purpose of getting the president. And that was their political view, and they wanted him out because of, and John wouldn't hire those people. So.
Do you remember him giving a speech to the staff about the importance of nonpartisanship?
He gave it to us individually. I don't know that I remember a general speech, but every one of us was told that as part of the interview process. And when I know when he told me that I could have the job, and he really said, if Frank Johnson recommends you, you've got the job. But he said, I want you to understand what the job is and what our viewpoint is. And so.
By the way, for the sake of the viewers who won't know, just tell us a little bit about Judge Johnson.
Well, Judge Frank Johnson is one of the icons of the civil rights era in the judiciary in the South. He was the federal district judge in the Middle District of Alabama and presided over a great many of the landmark decisions about public access, right to assemble, the Selma March, the Freedom Riders who were accosted by Klansmen and other, all of those things were trials that were in front of Judge Johnson. And he was a stern believer that the law was the law. And he was as tough a judge in the courtroom, but as nice a man outside it as you could have found. And he and John Doar were friends. John was with the Justice Department Civil Rights Division and was sent to Montgomery and to Alabama in general for those trials, and they came to admire and respect and like each other, and they remained friends all their lives. Of course, Judge Johnson later became a federal court of appeals judge and served on the 11th Circuit for a number of years before his death. But he's one of the great figures in American civil rights history. And I say this, and I don't think it has any relevance here, but my two partners that hired were my law firm's founders, and Judge Richard Reeves was another one. He was on the 5th Circuit and 11th Circuit, and Judge John Godbold, who actually hired me to practice law and was chief judge of the 11th and 5th Circuits. They were icons too, as were a number of them, Judge Wisdom and Judge Tuttle, but Frank Johnson was a standout. He was offered the FBI directorship, but he had some health problem and turned it down at that time. Would have been a great appointment, but he was a great jurist and a great man.
You mentioned when we when you referred to Mr. Jenner, you mentioned that he was in on the interview with, at that point, Secretary of State Kissinger. You were there too, weren't you?
I was, because the interview focused on the wiretaps and why they were authorized and whether they really were for national security purposes. And of course, Dr. Kissinger didn't authorize all of them. He only asked for, or was connected to, some of them. But he was so senior that it wasn't appropriate for him to be interviewed by younger lawyers like myself. But because that was in my task force area, I sat in when Bert Jenner and John Doar interviewed Dr. Kissinger. I sat in the back of the room and kind of, was on the wall. But they thought it was important to talk to him, just as they did with Judge Byrne, that he was interviewed by John and Bert on a Sunday morning in Washington. He flew in from California. And again, my job, because it was in my area, was to sit in and give the background to John and Bert for the questions they wanted to ask.
Were these viewed as were these under oath?
No, they were not.
And were the sort of transcripts of these interviews shared with the committee, or
they weren't even all transcribed? But they would have been. I mean, we could have converted it to a testimonial form, but that didn't come to pass. But it helped us interpret the documents. It helped us understand other things. Did
Secretary Kissinger agree that some of the wiretaps were not for national security purposes?
Well, he defended the ones that he thought were. He was very concerned about leaks out of the State Department. And that's what had initiated the contact with the FBI, to try to find out who was leaking sensitive material. He, and I suspect truthfully, professed that he had no idea that the program had grown into other areas, and that other people, that once the FBI was on board for wiretapping domestically, it would spread into the areas it did. And he said, I had nothing to do with that. I didn't ask for it. I didn't receive the reports. I didn't get the materials. I wasn't interested.
Thank you. What do you remember of your reaction to the pardon?
Well, I thought it was right. This didn't need to be criminalized. There was enough national tragedy and enough personal tragedy. There was absolutely nothing appropriate about trying to criminalize it. That would have turned it into a really nasty partisan vendetta and exercise that just never should have happened. And I thought it was entirely appropriate. I'm sorry it cost President Ford re-election. It probably did, but he did the right thing.
Did you do any public service again after this?
Not at that level. I do, of course, locally. I'm a judge, have been for 15 years for our state bar, disciplinary process, and local boards and all, but no, I've not.
What did this experience teach you about government?
Probably some sense of patience and perspective, that things tend to work out, even though at the moment of partisan fighting, they don't seem to be likely to. And that there are more good people there than the press would have us think. Hamilton Fish is an example. If ever there's somebody who was the character type who ought to be in Congress, he was it. And there were lots of them. Walter Flowers was one. I mean, there were just plenty. Peter Rodino was one. It also teaches you there's a lot behind the scenes, a lot of jealousies, a lot of pulling and tugging. The unhappy story with Jerry Ziefman, was one example of that. And that some people are probably not admirable and aren't going to be, and you can't redeem them all. And but overall, that process, I think, was a high point in American democracy. It was a low point from the sense that the president's people got off track and into it, and it kind of spiraled, and and they lost. I think they lost their perspective. But I think overall it was a cleansing process. Probably people have too casually suggested since then that their political enemies ought to be impeached. And none of that has happened since. I mean, there were people who wanted to impeach George Bush. There were people who, there was the Clinton business, all that. All of that was, it seems to me, of a much, much lower level of gravity than what we had. And people behave worse in these later ones.
You mean the politicians?
Yes.
You mentioned, what do you want to say about Jerry Ziefman?
Well, you remember Mr. Ziefman was a staff attorney. He may have been the committee general counsel. And when a special staff was chosen, he felt very aggrieved. He thought it ought to have been assigned to him as the committee's counsel. He was not very helpful, to put it mildly, toward the work that the impeachment staff was doing. He became resentful about it and obstructive, and has, in the years since, written a number of unhappy things in in journals and places about sniping at what he said was the work of the staff and how it went down, as opposed to a cooperative thing. Now, I can understand the ego involved in it. This was a moment in history when he was at a place where he had an expectation that this historical event would fall under his jurisdiction, and it didn't. And he did resent it, and he made that very clear. And I think that's too bad.
As we conclude, give us a word picture of Mr. Doar. What was it like to work for him?
John was, and I would expect still is, very demanding of the purity of the work. He's intellectually rigorous. He expected us to be. I remember including a fact in a statement of information that I didn't have proper proof for, and he privately said to me, "Now that we can't have," and I felt it was a very low moment for me, but it was the right answer. I mean, he's a remarkable figure, really, in American history. Both this and the civil rights work that he did, and yet he's very unassuming. He's very self-effacing. Doesn't like public. He doesn't want to make himself the focus of the thing. I think history will write him down as a great man, and I hope we'll get him on tape for this, because he has an insight that none of the rest of us have. And truthfully, none of the rest of us would have sat for interviews but for his permission, because he had a strong ethic that you don't. And he at one time thought we were talking about a commercial undertaking, and he said, you don't profit from government service. You serve, and you serve because that's what you're doing, and that's what you're supposed to do. And when we all reassured him that wasn't our purpose. We wanted it recorded for historical reasons, and while it was personally important to us to have it collected, we certainly weren't trying to get any money. And if there was ever some book out of it or whatever, we wouldn't take any money for it. And so, but John Doar is he's an iconic figure in his own right, and probably historically better known for the civil rights trials. He handled the Mississippi murders as well as the Alabama business, and but I think he's a great man, and he's but very, very modest man.
Why do you think he hasn't gotten the historical recognition for his work on impeachment?
Partly because he doesn't want it. He viewed it as a task that was given to him and to do as best he knew how. He didn't seek any publicity. He didn't want it. I think he's avoided it, in fact. But I don't think it could have been done as effectively, as honorably. That is, without the partisanship, without the leaks and the, all that going on. And certainly not as effectively and focused as it was, except for John Doar and his leadership.
I know it's been a long time, but do you remember what it was that you wanted to add that he told you to remove?
I don't. It was something. It wasn't that he objected. I didn't. He said, "I don't mind it being in there, but you've got to have the proof, and you don't. These documents that you cite as the proof don't prove that." and I'm sorry to say I cannot remember it, but I had probably done a little extrapolation, and I'd drawn inferences and conclusions that he didn't feel were properly supported, and he was not going to have. This wasn't an argument by us. We weren't lawyers summing up something to a jury. We were stating facts, and that's the way he wanted it.
How did your thoughts about President Nixon evolve over this period?
That's interesting. I don't know. As I said, I was a Republican. I voted for him. I still think historically he has many, many positive features, and I think will be remembered for those positive features. I think he probably was among the oddest people who ever occupied the office. Of course, I never met him. No one ever interviewed him in our group. And I mean, I think there's some strange people probably just it's a historical thing, who've occupied the presidency. Maybe you have to be to go through what you have to do to get to be president. But I think I think this was something that was such a colossal misjudgment. And maybe they were just too close to it. He had no chance, and I'm telling you something that's self-evident. He was going to win that second election. There wasn't even a doubt about it. There wasn't any need to wiretap the Democratic headquarters. There wasn't any need to break in there. There wasn't any need. It was paranoia. They just didn't have to do these things. But once it got going, the impulse to protect your image, to hide it, and the sense of power that you can do that, you can fix things, you can get people to clam up or to tell other stories, whether you manipulate them with money or with pressure or with promises or whatever, just took hold, and it just ate itself up as it rolled on. But I don't have any special insight about President Nixon. I mean, all that's something any number of people better qualified than me could have said.
Well, I was just asking about your impressions as you did the work.
Well, now all my impressions, obviously, are from paper and from hearing his voice on tape. And I just, that's what I said about the tapes before. The tone of it, the conspiratorial, almost locker room talk about how to, and I'm not a prude about it, I don't mean the profanity, that doesn't make any difference, but I'm talking about the sort of how do we fix this, and we can get to him this way, and it's something you have to hear in the tone as well as the words on the paper that is shocking in a way.
Are there any stories that you recall that I haven't listed today?
I would throw in, this is not a story about, and I'll look at my notes real quick because I know we've been here long enough, but I will. This is a Hillary Clinton story as it relates to that. As I said earlier, Hillary was a very junior lawyer, and she was obviously extremely bright and capable, and she pretty quickly made herself indispensable. If you had a task that you needed to run to ground, and you wanted it done, you wanted it done right and quickly. You gave it to Hillary to do, and she did. And of all the lawyers at that level who were hired, just out of law school and all, she's the one who became a central figure. And we had a final night gathering. A group of us stayed behind to write the final report because John Doar said that, look, there's no comprehensive final answer. We've got a lot of evidence and things in the transcripts, and it ought to be put together into a summation, if you will. And so we stayed past the resignation and had a dinner over at the Monocle, which is on the Senate side. I don't know if the restaurant's even still there, but it was the three. It was Evan and Bob Sack and me and John Labovitz, who had done the legal research and the constitutional research about impeachment, and John Doar. Bert was not there. Bernie Nussbaum was there, and Hillary. So that you had the real senior people and the next senior, which would have been Sack and Gill and Davis, and one junior, Hillary. But she was had made herself a part of the inner circle because she, as I said, could be relied on. I liked her. I didn't agree with her politics. We joked with each other. I called her a left-wing pinko. She called me a right-wing Neanderthal. And but we stayed over there and ate and drank till they closed the restaurant up, and they're putting the chairs up on the tables around, and they had to run us out. We were there till midnight, I guess, and the restaurant closed at 10 or 10:30, but they let us stay. And everybody had had a lot of wine and things, and we all walked back across the Capitol grounds because Doar had an apartment fairly close, and I've forgotten where Hillary lived, but and that was one last bus I could catch out to Arlington, where my wife and son were, from Federal Triangle. But I just remember walking back, this group. That's all of us that were kind of left behind, and and it was a special moment with them, and all of those people are the special friends forever. And that Doar knit that group together. That doesn't have anything to do with the merits of the impeachment or anything, but like I say, she was a player by then. I hope you can interview next in the next tier, John Labovitz, because he did the. I will give you that because I know you got the last impeachment of anybody that had occurred that was in which there was actually a trial was a federal judge by the name of Halstead Ritter, who was impeached in the 1930s. And the congressman who was the House manager, which would have been lead trial counsel is really what he was a congressman named Sam Hobbs from Selma, Alabama, whose son was my senior partner, Judge Truman Hobbs, who's a federal district judge now. And so the research as to, number one, what's an impeachable offense, and how do you conduct a trial in the Senate? Because nobody had done it. I mean, they just weren't. Were in Judge Hobbs had his father's archives, and he sent me those papers, the transcripts and the pleadings and how it went, and they were made available. It wasn't identical, obviously. A federal district judge is not the president, but which Judge Ritter was I think he was from Florida, but I'm not sure. But anyway, that coincidence was just a quirk that was available to us. But anyway, John Labovitz is quite a bright man, and he really, I think, did some important constitutional analysis. I don't know if there's anything else of consequence. I do have in my notes about the political matters memoranda. I don't know if you want to mention that.
Mention that. That's a very good story. That's important.
The Haldeman collected from his staff people and others who would send him things called political matters memoranda, and it was all kinds of just that, political matters. But in them, they got reports from the gemstone files, which were the wiretaps, and the break-in reports from the plumbers and what they found and so on. We published initially the entire collection, and it's about that thick, of the political matters memoranda. And there's a lot of political dirt and skullduggery, and how do we get this congressman to vote our way, and how do we get this person to do things, and what pressure can we bring to bear on them, and if somebody misbehaved, cut them off from access to the White House mess. I mean, there was kind of things. And the Republicans on the committee said they cried foul, said, well, this is not right. Those things don't have anything to do with the impeachment. That's just an embarrassment, and that shouldn't be published. And that tug of war went on, and the Democratic majority, I think, probably because they imagined that such things probably existed from Lyndon Johnson's administration and others, said, you're right, we'll withdraw all that, and only publish I think there are 19 of those that contain information about gemstone, and the rest of it should be destroyed. And they had already been published in those brownish gray books, and there were 5,000 copies that were made, getting ready to put them in evidence, and we were instructed to burn them all and have them destroyed. And we did almost all of them. There are 5 or 6 copies left. I think you probably have custody of the original documents now, but this collection was saved by the senior members of the staff. Everybody had one of their own, took them out of the pile of 5,000 and kept them as a sort of a treasure, I guess. But I mean, they're all not relevant now at this time. They're historically interesting, but most of the people in them are dead and gone and all that. But what was published was a little volume, about that size, versus the big volume. And I think I brought you for the archives, both versions.
Did you ever think of interviewing Gordon Strachan?
There was some pressure about it, and I can't remember why we didn't. Maybe the pressure of time. There was a lot of obstruction thrown up legally about the ability to interview Haldeman and Ehrlichman and those people very close to the president on executive privilege and all of that fight. And somebody like Dr. Kissinger, I think he wanted to make it clear to us that he was not involved in the political abuse side of it, and so he came. But we didn't interview. If Strachan was interviewed, I didn't participate in it. So I know I did participate in Colson and Crow and Liddy, and I don't know, some more of those. But I mean, just for fun, since this is probably the only time we'll. I'll give you just one other quick, Congressman Hungate. Bernie Nussbaum, who I guess is going to interview on Saturday, is a very rapid-speaking New Yorker, and partly he thinks so quickly, he's trying to get it all out. He was presenting some of the evidence to the committee, and he gets, 1,000 words a minute in. And he was going so quickly, and finally the chairman spoke, said, Mr. Nussbaum, and everybody's eyeballs were kind of, said, it's approaching lunch. Said, can you tell us, are you going to reach a stopping point? And he said, well, Mr. Chairman, yes, I recognize that. I said, I'll try to be quick. And Mr. Hungate broke in and said, no, Mr. Nussbaum, don't be quick, be brief. And the distinction is a valid one, and I think you'll be fascinated when you meet Bernie. But I think that's probably the major things I wanted to, that I made notes about. Anyway, we were proud of what the end, not the result. We didn't have a result we were looking for. We were proud of the product, and we were proud of the honorable way we think the staff behaved in terms of conducting its analysis, and no leaks and no politics. And it's all attributable to John Doar's leadership. It really is.
Dick, Gill, thank you very much for your time today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope sometime my grandson might be interested in reading some of everybody's stories.
I hope so too.